charged next week.
They claim they got info on the whole organization.
They put somebody undercover. We'll put somebody undercover.
I got someone.
Can we trust him?
He's family. Whoa, Leo, you're not talking about Corky.
In a family of made men, Corky Romano was made of something different. But now, the most gentle veterinarian in the world
I'm sorry.
will do whatever it takes
Pull down your pants.
No.
to save his family.
Corky, I'm not going to give you a wedgie. I'm going to put a wire on you.
Ow! I'm just a little wired. I mean, wired as in jumpy. I don't mean wire in my crotch.
Touchstone Home Video presents Chris Kattan,
You guys want some cookies?
You know the drill. Take them out. Sorry.
Corky Romano,
Oh, yeah.
Come on, sing it!
The reflex is an only child who's in the power.
now available on DVD and video.
Welcome to a very special episode of The Shabby Detective. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me, of course, is Mr. Chris Dashew.
You know, I feel like there's something funny I could say here, but I just don't know if Chris Kattan would appreciate me making light of this movie. So I'm here too, folks.
On this very special episode, we are jumping through time a little bit, going from between seasons 3 and 4 of Columbo all the way up to a very late role from Mr. Peter Falk. We are talking about when he was Francis A. Romano, the head of the Romano crime family, who has 2 upstanding, thuggish sons and 1 black sheep of the family. Of course, I'm talking about Corky Romano, not Corgi Romano. That's a whole different thing. That's when the whole movie is recast with animals, which would actually be fitting for this film because Corky is a veterinarian who just wants to lead his life and go about his veterinary business, but he's got to help out Pops because don't you know he had a heart attack and he's on trial. Wow, he's on trial. All this evidence against him. And then Corky gets recruited and gets thrown into the FBI in order to steal the evidence. That is our plot, and we will be spoiling all of the twists and turns of Corky Romano as we go along. So if you don't want anything ruined, turn off the podcast, go watch Corky Romano, and come on back. We will still be here. So, Chris, when was the first time you saw Corky Romano, and what did you think?
I saw Corky Romano in theaters in 2001. This film came out a month and a day after 9/11. So the atmosphere in our country was at an all-time high. Let's just put it that way. We were in need of a feel-good film, and Corky Romano was there to fill that hole. Or not. I remember seeing this movie when I was 11. We were in the theaters. I remember the trailer. I remember this was the first time I ever heard Aha's Take on Me, which is forever seared in my brain because of Chris Kattan singing along to it in the film. And what's funny is I was sitting and thinking about it as we were kind of opening the show, and I was thinking to myself, while you described the plot, I was like, that's so fucking weird. The plot of this movie is pretty much the plot of Little Nicky. Literally to a T. You have a son who is the outcast of 2 other brothers, in this case, Chris Kattan, in that film, Adam Sandler. You have the 2 brothers in that film who are sons of demons. In this film, Chris Kattan is clearly the one who takes after the mother. So in similar case in Little Nicky, when we meet his mother, played by Reese Witherspoon, who's an angel, we understand why Little Nicky is so kind of nice and at odds with his dickhead brothers. In this movie, we find out that Chris Kattan's mother and their mother was seemingly the one who kept the family together, so you kind of can see where his character is coming into things. And it also includes a father who is on, in Little Nicky's case, death's door because the brothers go to heaven. In this case, because he's being framed for things he didn't do. Both characters being played by relatively well-known character actors. In Little Nicky, Harvey Keitel. In this film, Peter Falk. Little Nicky came out a year before this movie, did pretty poorly at the box office as well, but I think it's been kind of reappraised in the last 2 decades as a lesser Adam Sandler hit, but for people that kind of jibe with the theme, I think it stands out. And I would say similarly to this movie, it comes out when mafia stuff is kind of at its peak, a second or third peak even. I mean, the early 90s was a pretty big peak for mafia stuff, given how important Goodfellas was. And then, I mean, we're talking about it on another show, What No Fucking Ziti, but this show comes out this movie comes out post Sopranos. It's coming out in the same time as The Sopranos, another movie that we'll probably end up covering on the Sopranos podcast in between seasons. Similarly to this is Mickey Blue Eyes, because that movie includes like half of the cast of The Sopranos before that show even aired. And this movie has a couple carryovers from The Sopranos, but this movie's being made in 2001 because The Sopranos is the biggest fucking thing on TV at this point. It wasn't in 1999. It took a while for The Sopranos to kind of get that head of steam. The second and third seasons were those moments for that show. And this is coming out in the second or third season of the show. So this is coming out at a time where people are more amenable to these themings than they might have been before. All of that to answer your question very longly with I saw it in theaters. I thought it was funny. Rewatching it now, I mean, it has a lot of problems. It's not necessarily the best written film I've ever watched in terms of the dialogue, and the plot I think is very contrived, if not insanely contrived. But I love Chris Kattan. I'm not going to make any bones about it. His autobiography is named for the thing I think he's really known for, which is the movie I've seen him in way more than this, which is Night at the Roxbury, which is based on the Butabi brothers from SNL. But I like Chris Kattan. So just if you're listening to this and you think that this is going to be a Corky Romano drag fest, it's probably going to be the exact opposite of that. And if you listen to our thoughts on films that come out recently and think, how can two people who don't like Dune 2 like Corky Romano? Folks, you're about to find out. Because I'm kicking it to you, Mike White. Same question, Corky Romano. Let's hear all about it.
I don't remember the first time I saw this. I think it must have been a rental. It might have even been a VHS rental. I mean, this was 2001.
Sounds about right.
I think I'm pretty sure I got my first DVD player in brown, definitely before the year 2000, before Y2K happened and the apes took over. Yeah, but it might have been a VHS rental. And I really enjoyed it. I like Chris Kattan. I'm not a big fan of Night at the Roxbury. I remember turning that off pretty early, but I am a huge fan of Monkey Bone. And he is not in that movie very much, but he makes an incredible appearance in there where he is a organ donor. He's a gymnast who broke his neck, which is kind of ironic. And we'll talk about that later on, but he goes through the whole part of his movie with his neck tilted over, and I think he's trying to use duct tape to straighten it out. I want to say it's Brendan Fraser has possessed that body, but he possesses a body that is damaged, and it's fucking hilarious.
He has a bamboo rod actually stuck down the back of his shirt, and he's had his head taped to it. I actually forgot about that. To your point, he's probably the best part of Monkey Bone that doesn't have to do with Brendan Fraser or John Turturro. Like, it is without a doubt, like one of the things where when it happens in the third act of the movie, you're like, what is going on here? But I'm here for it. You're totally right.
I wish I could see what Henry Selick's original Monkey Bone was like.
Right.
And I also wish I could see what Corky Romano was supposed to be, because he talks in his autobiography, Kattan's autobiography, that it was going along, was going pretty good. And then this Disney exec shows up who is told, oh, these dailies are great. The Disney exec falls asleep during the dailies. So suddenly becomes this big panic of, oh my God, we have to reshoot. So they reshot everything they had shot, I think over like a 2-week period or more. And this isn't a long shoot for this movie. Kattan is saying that they had the second unit going and the first unit going, and basically the second unit was just doing reshoots of the first few weeks. So he would go from first unit, they drive him over to second unit, he would redo what he had done with a really stupid look on his face, like this ever-present grin, and then he would come back over to the first unit and shoot some more. He said he was working like 14, 15-hour days every single day from there on out, which just sounds insane.
This movie was clearly rated R originally because there are clearly tons of jokes that are ADR'd, or I think the thing that the movie does the most is cutting away to just someone sitting there and then voiceover behind it, which is clearly ADR'd. There's a moment when Peter Berg, Chris Penn, and Chris Kattan are in the car together, and it's like they clearly say fuck. It's very obvious that they're saying fuck and other really kind of blue things, and they've just edited it out in the most ADR post-production, we'll fix it in post way. And man, what a fucking shame. What a shame, as this movie would do, because we can't say fuck, but we can say fag and faggot a lot, which again, like, look, as the resident homo of the podcast, it's okay for me to say it. And I'm not saying the movie can't say it, but I was under the impression that that was probably R-rated language. I guess not.
Probably not. No,
oh, God.
No,
you can say
fag were
right.
Full on. Yeah, no problems with those.
You can say faggot as many times as you want, but don't say fuck once. I guess you can say fuck once.
You can't even say blowjob. I mean, at one point when in that car scene, I think he says he's talking about Zach Galifianakis' character, and he's just like,
You complimented the guy on his equipment, and then you thanked him for his time. I mean, Christ, Corky, might as well give him a glass of wine and a handshake.
That is the line.
I'm like, he either said hand job or blow job, and I'm not sure which. So,
and it's a shame because you can tell that this movie's kind of been cut off at the knees, because a lot of the comedy ends up being, I guess, laughing at Chris Kattan, not laughing with Chris Kattan. In a lot of ways, it feels like the movie kind of hates him as a character, and it's doing everything in its power to make him seem like a complete and utter fucking moron. He's not a moron. He's just way too nice. And that's the problem. But the movie and all of the reshoots and the kind of the way that they cut the movie, it's like they left in every take that makes him look like a fucking moron. And it undercuts any sort of interest you would have in the character because he just seems like an idiot bumbling through everything. And I'm not saying that that couldn't have worked, but in this case, it doesn't really work.
You can tell that there was a structure at one point, and I tried to find an earlier draft of the screenplay or a draft of the screenplay and couldn't find it because I wanted to see how it was structured originally because, like you're saying, he's not an idiot. The first time that we see him when he's not singing Take On Me, when he's at the vet's office, and yeah, his boss is taking advantage of him. He's like, oh, I have to go golfing. And I don't know how this guy, well, he's standing later, but I thought that he was in a wheelchair.
He was
going out. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay. And obviously he's got his golf clubs and everything. He's like, I got to go out and do this other thing. And Corky, I don't know if he just lets it slide or if he is supposed to be stupid enough to just be like, okay, sure, Dr. Kip, no problem.
Or he wants to be the vet. Like, isn't that the whole thing? He's like, I want to be the vet. So what does it matter if the vet doesn't want to be there, right?
Exactly. Because he comes in and he's just like, oh, hey.
Uh-oh. Someone's got the trots.
Corky, are you a mind reader?
No, I just saw some business in the parking lot and it looked fresh. And judging by the consistency and pigmentation, I could tell it came from a cat. Probably a calico. Hello, Mr. Langford. How are you? High five, Oscar. High five. High five. Oh, let me guess. Arthritis?
How'd you know?
I just saw him shifting his weight off his left paw, but don't worry. We'll have him up and sniffing butts in no time.
Remembers every pet's name, knows every owner. They all love this guy. But then he's got all the animals in his office, and then he's trying to get this cat out of the crate, an animatronic cat most of the time, if not all of the time. And the cat ends up chomping on this bird, and there's just this whole hilarity going on. And I'm like, okay, is this making the character look stupid or what's going on? I mean, that it's pretty like, oh, well, this is going to happen, especially when the woman says, oh, that bird is our reason for living. And I'm like, oh boy. And it's more like almost like Dumb and Dumber type humor where you're just like, oh, okay, something bad is going to happen to that bird. Okay.
And yeah, I guess maybe that scene is meant to inform us that Corky's a bumbling moron, but the movie's at odds with itself almost immediately. Because you can't have these two things be true. You can't have him be a bumbling moron vet, but at the same time be able to go up to all these people and be like, well, it's this, this, and this, based on the like most barest of information. Like,
Right. He's fucking Columbo.
Yeah, literally, he's Animal Columbo. You know what he's actually doing? He's doing the Ace Ventura thing. I mean, that thing where it's like,
True.
I mean, again, like, and it seems like that this idea kind of starts from that notion of like, what would happen if someone who really loved animals was also in the mob? But again, like, I guess I have a hard time believing a couple things. So let's just break the idea down, because you mentioned it at the top, that it's him going undercover at the FBI. Not really, though, right? Like, the FBI would know who he is. If they have all this information on the family, this son wouldn't be a surprise to them. It wouldn't be like The Departed, where you have a guy that nobody knows that they can pretend and get him into the system and make him disappear because he has no family and nobody gives a shit about him, so he's kind of just a man on his own. In this, he's a part of this known crime family that the FBI has been watching for seemingly years. I don't understand how long they've been watching them, but they've been watching them long enough to know everybody in the organization but this one person. And it's...
Well, and especially they have an inside man with Uncle Leo, with Fred Ward, who for some reason I didn't realize that he was part of the family until later on where they're saying Uncle Leo. And I was like, oh, okay. Because when he says to Falk towards the end, why didn't you let me run the business? I'm like, you, an outsider? Why would? And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, I guess he is the uncle.
Again, like you just mentioned, he would be like, well, they have this third brother named Corky Romano.
Yeah.
And again, like, they'd have pictures of him. There's a point in the movie, and I only bring this up because the movie undercuts itself. There's a scene in the movie where Corky goes to the house disguised as a postman in shorty shorts and a mustache. So that's the only, and a hat. So that's all he's using to disguise himself. And they get pictures of him, and the explanation that the movie gives makes no sense. The explanation that he gives as to why he was there makes no sense. And again, I'd like to believe that the FBI aren't such fucking bumbling morons that they don't know he's a Romano family member. I guess it is that easy that you can have Zach Galifianakis make a fake ID for you, and then you can just walk into the FBI and flash it and people will believe you. Like, I don't know. These are the dumbest FBI agents. This is the dumbest field office possible. That's, I guess, what I'm saying here. It's very contrived.
I kind of want to know how long ago his mother died, because it feels like once she died, he was almost disowned by the rest of the family. It was that whole idea of the dad trying to protect him a little. Guido Corleone, like Michael's the good son. Michael's not going to get into the family business. Sonny, no problem. Fredo, yeah, he's a little special. Tom, he's my consigliere, but Michael, keep him out of this. It's a little that, but more it's just get this fucking guy out of here. So I don't know how long he's been estranged from them, because these guys are not that old. I mean, Chris Penn was 30 something during this. So maybe he had been gone for 10 years. Obviously there's that picture of Falk the Francis and Corky together at Corky's graduation. And again, I don't know if that's his high school graduation, college graduation. And obviously the mother isn't in that picture. It would have been kind of nice to have a cameo by an actress as the mother, maybe even like Gina Rollins or something.
Let's point out, we're grappling with the idea of how is Corky able to be in the FBI without being known. I guess the other question is their plan is to have him destroy the evidence that they only have one copy of.
Right.
Again, like, this is 2001. We are in the time of computers. This is hard for me to believe that if this had been set in like maybe 75, I'd be like, okay, you're destroying all the evidence, so it's all gone. I mean, we've heard about cases from the 70s and 80s and 90s even where the evidence has degraded or the evidence is gone.
The Secret Service is now being accused of deleting text messages from January 5th and January 6th. After the Department of Homeland Security's internal watchdog requested those messages.
In a time of computers, that is not a thing. And I'm talking about the kind of evidence they're talking about in this movie, which is verbal evidence. It's a deposition that was given. They probably even have a recording of it somewhere. It's just kind of fucking moronic because, again, the movie doesn't understand basic common things. And it's really just I don't know, I don't know why it has to play so fast and loose with things. Again, maybe I'm being nitpicky, but the movie is the entire plot hinges on him going and getting physical evidence from the FBI lockup and destroying it. And that's not how this works, is what I'm saying, just at a base level.
I'm okay with that, though. I'm really okay with them putting this premise down as what Corky's motivation is. And I kind of like all the misunderstandings that become good things. I mean, it's such comedy 101 kind of stuff that I'm really okay with that. What I was having some issues with, and maybe not even issues, I was just questioning a little bit, was he should be able to use, because his superpower to me is the whole thing with animals.
Right.
And I was really hoping that he was going to be able to use that, because we've got the scene where there's the guy who's got the gun and he's like taking some people hostage and stuff. And Kattan ends up firing off this rifle like crazy. And there's a dog who gets in the way of this explosion, and he brings the dog back to life, gives it CPR. And then there's a scene where he goes undercover as a skinhead.
I just thought that I can get some heroin and then maybe we can all go out and commit some hate crimes and stuff.
And with that, like, I love how his brothers come in and the brothers' crew, and they, kick all these guys' asses, and then they leave him there, and he's with the dog and, giving the dog kisses. Bad dogs aren't born, they're made. I was really hoping, like, every single time they got to a new thing, there would be a different animal solution to how things work. I know that I'm really pushing that. Like, I don't know how easy or hard, probably very hard it would be to do, but I was like, well, that's kind of cool. Like, using the animals as part of this thing, kind of to your point, like a little Ace Ventura-esque. I thought that would have been a neat way for him to eventually kind of get the upper hand in every single situation. Not necessarily. At one point, Marty Kleba just happens to see his ID and is like, oh, and that's how he gets out of the situation where the two FBI guys are captured in that illegal gambling operation. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't an animal-related thing. That was just because he's a Romano. But that's what I was hoping for.
I'm with you. I think that the movie could have leaned into it heavier. I mean, Ace Ventura, maybe it's because Ace Ventura is so well written as a movie that you kind of don't think anything of it. But there are plenty of scenarios in that movie that have to do with animals. The opening of the movie, part with the great white shark, the entire premise of the movie is based on the idea that the Miami Dolphins mascot has gone missing, which is a fucking dolphin. So yeah, you call Ace Ventura. I don't know. I get the fish out of waterness of this story. I really do. I just wish, to your point, that they had really done more with the fact that he's a veterinarian, because if there's no point in doing it, why do it? Like, why do it if you're not going to do anything with it, I guess is what I mean. And it really seems like they
laid down.
Go ahead.
He laid down his life for his country. I mean, that's what all veterinarians do, right?
Jesus Christ. I don't know if this movie would have been better received if it had been more like Ace Ventura, but I do think the movie would have hung together better and been a funnier movie overall if they had had more scenarios that were pet specific. Because again, the vet stuff seems completely unnecessary if you don't do that stuff. They do it, like you say, once, and then they never come back to it. And it's like, wait a second, why does him being a vet have anything to do with this then? He could have just been anybody. He could have been a florist, like he could have been anything. He could have worked at fucking Jiffy Lube for all I care. Like there's nothing that is important about his profession. So don't give him a profession that apparently matters.
I mean, I still find this movie very funny. I like the interactions that he has with Peter Berg and Chris Penn. Again, something that could have happened a little bit. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm picking on the movie, but I swear I'm not. There are a few joke setups that never get payoff. Like at one point, Corky is being questioned. There's a whole bunch of photos that I think Peter Berg's character, Paulie, took. And when it comes to the Vanessa Shaw character, it's just her boobs, right? It's all of these guys. And then Chris Penn, as Peter Romano, says, oh, don't worry, Pops, I'll take care of it. I'll take the photos from now on. We never get that paid off. I was hoping for like all these beefcake type photos of the FBI guys.
Right.
Because that's his whole thing is like, Of course I'm into chicks, and oh, you must be plowing that girl by now, and oh, if it was me, I would have been doing it already. And just he puts on all those big macho airs, which of course, it's funny in 2001, oh, this macho guy is gay. All right. I kind of find it what's funnier is I find the Peter Berg illiteracy thing to be even funnier, especially when he's at the ice cream seller. And he just keeps picking all of these flavors that they don't have, and they only have 3 flavors available.
No, that I think for me, that's probably one of the funniest moments in the entire movie. And look, I think it's even funnier for me knowing that, Peter Berg is now not really, I guess not even anymore
as an actor.
Yeah, he's not an actor anymore. Like he is completely a director now, like hardcore director. Peter Berg works with Wahlberg a lot, I'm pretty sure. Has done a lot of, I would say, rah America movies, even.
Yeah.
Boston bombing movie. And then I think there was one in there about Benghazi, probably. Look, again, like I like him as an actor, his politics or whatever the fuck, and his directorship aside. This is the only movie I really think of when I think of Peter Berg as an actor is this. Chris Penn has done a ton of things that are well received, well regarded, possibly even stolen from other people. But Chris Penn's character in this movie is so generically written. It's shocking. But the Peter Berg stuff seems really inspired for whatever reason. And I don't know where all of that inspiration that they got with that character went with everything else. Because his character is the funniest character in the whole movie. And like you said, the scene with him ordering rum raisin and pistachio and just doing it with such earnestness because he's such a fucking moron that you just can't help but laugh. But at the same time, you feel bad for him because he's such a moron.
I think of him in a couple roles, like Last Seduction. He was fantastic in. A Midnight Clear, the one directed by Keith Gordon, is fantastic. His directing is kind of all over the place. Like he's done some things that I really like I enjoyed Very Bad Things. I love The Rundown. Then you get into stuff like Hancock, which I don't think that that's necessarily his fault that it was such a bad movie. Just the script of that felt like it was, I don't know, cobbled together. Like the first half of the movie felt good. And then as soon as you get this reveal, this twist that happens midway through, you might as well just turn it off and save some time because it was awful. But then, yeah, once he starts to get into like Battleship, Lone Survivor, Deepwater Horizon, to your point, Patriots Day, Mile 22, it's like, oh my God. And then he did that horrible Spencer Confidential that was on Netflix during the pandemic. Yeah, I wish he would go back to acting and to doing comedy because I think he does both of those very well.
You definitely pointed out all the Mark Wahlberg movies.
Ooh, yeah.
It's like a string of them from Lone Survivor through Spencer Confidential. They're just, and look, maybe it's just because I'm not a Mark Wahlberg guy either, which I'm really not. Like, I don't find him endearing in anything. If anything, he can be funny. Like in the other guys, he's kind of funny, but I don't like him when he's trying to be like earnest, rah, Mr. America. So I'm with you. Peter Berg needs to go back to doing stuff like this, middle of the road, early 2000s comedies that nobody remembers. And that's the other thing. This is a Chris Kattan vehicle film. Like, isn't that weird? And in a lot of ways, it's like David Spade vehicle movies or Norm Macdonald vehicle movies. Like, I get it. I understand that they're very popular on the respective things that they're on, but I don't think that I've ever thought of them like that. Like, as someone who could lead an entire movie. The Night at the Roxbury has Will Ferrell in it. And I think it works because it has Will Ferrell in it, who can balance off of Chris Kattan. This movie doesn't have anybody like that. It doesn't have anyone who is a known lead. It has Peter Falk, but to say that Peter Falk being in this movie is tenuous at best is being nice, because he's in 4 scenes. And man, what an easy gig for Peter Falk this must have been. Hey, am I right? Am I right or am I right? Man, to sit in a fucking bed and just never move. God, can you imagine? Oh, I have to sit in bed? All right, cool.
Yeah, he's got one scene outside where he has the heart attack. And the rest of this, he's just in bed with Fred Savage reading that storybook to him, and that's all.
we were going to do this and we wanted to do this because Peter Falk's in it, but he's really not in it. Like he does nothing. It's a shame, really.
Richard Roundtree is in here more than he is.
Yeah, he is. And also shithead comedy villain Matt Glave is also in this movie. He really reminds me of Christopher McDonald. Like
he does a good job in this.
Right.
Though. And yes, he is totally like, I'm waiting for him to talk about eating pieces of shit like you for breakfast.
Right. He has that like comedic villain energy that Chris McDonald has. And, Matthew Glave, obviously the other thing that he was a huge villain in his Wedding Singer. And he has some of that like dickhead energy here. I think it's a little bit more toned down, but that scene when they're in the office and everybody's using their first names and then he tries calling them by their first names and they're like, no, it's because you're an asshole. Like that scene is fantastic.
Hey, Howard. Wanted to see us? Howard? What happened to Sir? It's Mr. Schuster. And what is with those ridiculous ties? It's this jiggling little fruitcake, isn't it? Christ, relax, Brick. It's Agent Davis.
He's right. Relax, Brick.
There are inspired moments in this movie, like when Corky's on cocaine, giving the speech to all the children. Like that.
Okay. Yeah. Question. No. Question. Yeah.
That shit's hilarious. But again, like there's no movie in between. There's nothing stringing these scenes together. It's almost like, again, you have a really funny idea with a couple funny scenes that you're going to get to, but there's not like a real plot to this movie. And, you mentioned Vanessa Shaw, who is Corky Romano's love interest. Why? Like, again, this is a movie where there doesn't need to be a love interest at all. Like, and what's funny is if you look at the movie I compared it to, Little Nicky, that movie actually benefits from a love interest because Patricia Arquette and Adam Sandler have a really like interesting energy together. Chris Kattan and Vanessa Shaw don't have any chemistry at all. Like they don't really work together. It's not believable.
Had she just been, because she's got an axe to grind with the patriarchy, which I don't blame her for at all. Had she just been that, I think would have been better had she been that plus the love interest. But I mean, at the same time, I don't know. I'm okay with that. I cut this movie a lot of slack for whatever reason. That it just something about Kattan, he just always seems so earnest, and he is so super earnest in this movie. And I like that he's not, for the most part, a complete bumbling idiot. There are times where, like when he accidentally locks the perp in the car and the perp sets the car going backwards and his arm's caught in there. It's so typical comedy, but I just find it very funny, especially him bouncing all over the place. I guess it's the physicality that really appeals to me, just that he's such a physical comedian, and we don't get that too often. I mean, over the weekend I was talking about like Eddie Bracken and his physical comedy, or Jerry Lewis and some of that. Even like I guess Eddie Deazen's more just like a funny talker than a funny physical person, but I just like Kattan's physical comedy.
And I'm with you. I mean, you mentioned Monkey Bone, and that entire performance is physical. Again, mentioned Night at the Roxbury. They're not known for dialogue. They're known for one specific physical motion that, paired with that song, made everybody laugh. So to your point, Chris Kattan, like that's why I said like Chris Kattan is a weird choice to be the lead of a movie, because how often do you have someone who is solely known for physical comedy leading a movie where that they're going to have to deliver dialogue? I mean, that's like we're talking like Chaplin and Buster Keaton. Like they didn't expect to have to talk, so they were just doing physical comedy. Chris Kattan almost would have benefited from that, but there again, like you can't have that person be the vehicle of the movie unless it's a martial arts movie, seemingly. So Chris Kattan he's a weird choice because he kind of needs to be paired with somebody else, like a Will Ferrell type. And that's the other thing. Peter Berg and Chris Penn, not known for being comedic actors. So Chris Kattan is having to really do all the heavy lifting in those scenes to be funny because they're the straight men. No pun intended with Chris Penn's character. I think that Chris Penn's character being gay is like, it works as a joke, but like you said, like there's never really any payoff. I guess at the very end of the movie when he catches the bouquet, but again, that in and of itself feels like such a weird I don't know. Again, like the movie's not homophobic. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's played for laughs. Let's put it that way. It's one of the 3 gags that the movie goes back to frequently.
I like the small touches, like when he's talking about one of the agents and he describes him as like super fit or something, and he describes his physical attributes. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny that he noticed all of these things and is saying them so eloquently. But I'm glad that they don't abuse that joke too much.
No, they
there's
don't.
No like gay bar scene where he happens to catch his brother. And I like that Corky knows that his brother is gay and relates it to him in a very Rankin Bass way with Hermie and Rudolph.
Do you remember when we were kids and how we watched that Christmas special about Rudolph? And how Rudolph knew he was secretly different from all the other reindeer? And then, Rudolph tried to hide it, but that just, ended up making Rudolph angry and scared. And then he met Hermie the elf, remember? And
He didn't like to make toys.
And, but that actually made Rudolph feel like it was okay to be different. Do you remember that?
I don't have time for this shit.
That was the thing in this movie that made me laugh the hardest, was that whole scene. Because for me, I mean, we joked about it on the show. We joked about that on Rankin and Bass. And, I forgot that this movie had that scene where Corky talks about, Hermie the elf is gay, essentially. But yeah, I mean, what a trip, huh? To have to watch this movie and be like, oh, we've talked about, all the Rankin and Bass stuff. So I don't know. That made me laugh because I didn't remember that. I didn't remember that scene at all for whatever reason. The things that have stuck with me from this movie are not that. The things that have stuck with me, I think, for whatever reason, are, I guess, like the final act of the movie. Like everything up until the final act, I didn't really remember. But the final act, I remember a lot because the whole thing takes place in the house. And then they're running around outside the house. And again, yeah, I remembered all that, but I didn't remember most of the movie for the most part, including the Rankin and Bass stuff.
Going back to what you were saying earlier, as far as Kattan being a lead, I mean, this was the time we're going to trot out every cast member from SNL and we're going to see if they can handle a movie. And some of them were just bizarre. I know I've seen all the Ladies Man. Man, that was a real bad one. Or, gosh, I want to say there was one. Did I watch? I think The Hot Chick might be the best Rob Schneider film. But yeah, he was just being thrown into the Deuce Bigelow roles and The Animal. Remember that one?
I do.
Ah, man. I mean, of course, I think the most successful person of all of those was Sandler, and he kind of became the gravitational pull to which all of the other comedians went to, and kind of was, I think, working behind the scenes to get a lot of his friends' roles and helping out with stuff. I mean, I don't remember if like Tommy Boy and Black Sheep were Happy Madison Productions, but they definitely feel like they're cut from that same cloth. And I think a lot of it comes down to some of the producers. I mean, the executive producer, Robert Simons, was behind a lot of those. He was executive producer for, Corky Romano, of course, Joe Dirt, Little Nicky, one called Screwed, which I forgot that Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski did. He was kind of in the Scott Alexander, Larry Karaszewski business for a while because he also did all the Problem Child movies.
As a Screwed, speaking of Norm Macdonald vehicle films.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And Dave Chappelle, too?
Yeah. Big Daddy, The Waterboy, Dirty Work, Wedding Singer, Half Baked,
I mean,
Leave It to Beaver, That Darn Cat, Bulletproof, Happy Gilmore, Billy Madison, Airheads, and then the Problem Child movies.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason this feels like everything else, because it's literally being produced by someone who has had a hand in like half of the like Happy Madison things, if not like most of them for a while. I mean, now it's kind of taken on its own life through Netflix, but I mean, you mentioned a fair amount of Happy Madison stuff. You know, not necessarily stuff that I love, but there are a couple things on there that I love. But Joe, I mean, that's the funny thing. Like, I think another movie that this movie is very close to, but I think that this movie doesn't succeed as much as in terms of, I don't know, like rewatchability is Joe Dirt. I mean, this is another thing that comes out this year. I mean, it's 2001, the David Spade vehicle. And I think for whatever reason, David Spade was more cut out to have his own movies. I mean, again, he cut his teeth with Chris Farley, but he was always so different than Farley because Farley was the physical comedian, the way that Chris Kattan is. And it's like, again, like Chris Kattan needed somebody else. He needed a David Spade type in this movie to kind of play off of. But when you think of Joe Dirt, like that movie has a ton of really well-known character actors in it who leave an indelible mark on that movie. Christopher Walken, Dennis Miller is in there. Trying to remember who else. Adam Beach is in there for like a minute. The guy who plays Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat Annihilation, Brian Thompson, is in that movie. I mean, there's a lot of people in that movie that are really fantastic. And David Spade being in it kind of works because, again, he's the talky one. I think it's weird because Chris Kattan just, for me, doesn't seem like the right person for this kind of thing if they're not going to lean on the physical comedy. And the scenes where they lean on it, I think it works. Like you said, the scene with him talking to the kids on cocaine, pure physical comedy. Pure physical comedy. The stuff with the dog and the gun, physical comedy as well. Like, even the stuff in the veterinarian office is physical comedy, and it works pretty well. But when you try to get Chris Kattan to be the pithy one like David Spade, it doesn't really work because, like you said, he's just too goddamn nice. I believe Chris Kattan's probably a really nice guy in person. Like you said, he seems really earnest and genuine as a human being. That comes through in this role. I don't know. I kind of wish they had leaned on him being nice more than him being stupid as a stand-in for nice. Because it kind of seems like they're trying to equate the two, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love how he gets along with Richard Roundtree, the two FBI guys.
He's really endearing to them. Like, Don't make him an idiot. Just make him this really nice guy. Like, the movie's at odds with itself. I don't know why they had to make Corky Romano this bumbling moron. Just make him a guy who's way too nice.
It wouldn't surprise me if all of the moron stuff was thrust in there later on, but I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong on that stuff.
It feels like a late addition to try to make the movie funnier. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, this isn't getting the 10 laughs per minute that we need per the studio notes, so let's throw a bunch of scenes of Chris Kattan falling on his fucking face, fumbling around with shit. You know, just things that, again, like there are funny physical comedy beats in this movie, but they're funny because they serve the character. The ones that don't work are just like unnecessary and that go on for way too long.
Chris Kattan is the credited author for his autobiography, Baby Don't Hurt Me, Stories and Scars from Saturday Night Live, but there is a ghostwriter, Travis Thrasher, who's on there. So I don't know when I make this complaint who I'm making this complaint about, but there's a couple things in there where, like, he's talking about some of the movies that were coming out around the time of Corky Romano. He mentions Problem Child, and I was like, well, that's actually like 11 years earlier was the first Problem Child movie, and even when it comes to like the sequels, they weren't really close to this, so I kind of wish he would have got that right. He also talks about how there was an Entertainment Weekly article about how he was injured on the set of Saturday Night Live. And then when he went to go back and find that issue, that he bought it off of eBay twice and neither issue had the story about him in there. And I'm like, I don't think that Lorne Michaels has the power to have every issue of Entertainment Weekly pulped and reprinted without a particular story in it. So I'm like, maybe don't include that, or maybe actually track down the stuff, because otherwise it just doesn't seem possible. But apparently, I think it was May of 2001. Yeah, May of 2001. So before this came out, probably right around the time he was shooting this, maybe a little bit before, he was in a skit on SNL. And he took a really hard fall. He wasn't happy with this prop chair that he had. It was a real chair, and he had to like throw himself back off of it. Apparently, he threw himself back so hard, speaking of Buster Keaton, he actually broke his neck and didn't realize that his neck was broken. And he said that he ignored it so much that his fucking arm that was affected with nerve pain and stuff started to atrophy. And he's like, oh, if you look at this sketch that I did in 2002, you can see that I'm favoring my right-hand side, even though I'm left-handed, and I'm trying to keep my left arm away from the camera because I think he was like half dressed or something. It might have been a Mr. Peepers skit. So I'm just like, what the fuck, dude? You just, it's really bad that he had this happen to him. And I'm just like, so was he working in pain while this movie was happening? I don't know if he ended up like every other person that's been injured on set abusing painkillers or not. Maybe that's why he didn't star in more vehicles. But I think also he was very shy to even try to star in anything else after this movie because it just blew up in his face. And he made an interesting point that the movie ended up making back its budget, no problem, plus some. And I think he said it made 26 million. And again, I'll have to check that figure. And he's like, well, and also not the Water Boy, but I think like Billy Madison made 26 million. And he's like, so it wasn't that much of a flop. And I was like, well, in the scheme of things, I think people were more positive critically to Billy Madison than they were to this film because most reviews that I read just lambasted this and they could not get over this film. And I'm like, is this a reaction for 9/11? Like, why are you just focusing in on how bad this film is? It's not that bad, folks. In fact, I'm a defender. I like this movie.
Well, and to your point, like, I'm right there with you. Like, that's why I had to mention the 9/11 of it all. It feels like it was time to take a movie out back to the woodshed and beat the shit out of it. And this movie was an easy mark, only because, again, to your point, it's a kind of high concept, dumb idea with Chris Kattan as the lead. And again, if you like where the movie's going, and if you like Chris Kattan or Peter Falk or Peter Berg and Chris Penn, you're probably going to, like we have, find a little place in your heart for this movie. But again, it's not, like you mentioned, it's not being mentioned in conversations like Wedding Singer and Billy Madison are, which are, high points of comedies in the 90s. This movie, I wouldn't say this movie's a low point of comedies in the 2000s. I mean, there are much lower points that the 2000s will get to, especially with stuff that is SNL inspired. This is not SNL inspired. This is literally just, Chris Kattan is well known because he's on SNL. This isn't a Pat movie or a Coneheads, though I do love Coneheads. But the movie just seemingly gets taken out to the woodshed because of 9/11, and everybody just, things are coming out and people are kind of in a heightened state of awareness. And, it's so weird to me. This movie doesn't deserve any hate. It's just kind of there, kind of exists,
I think Ebert gave this a thumbs up, even though he says some very not nice things. Like, when I use the words, quote, desperately unfunny, what do I mean? And he just like starts to go through why he hates this movie. I'm like, this was a thumbs up movie? Okay. Yeah, he really tore into this. I think a lot of critics tore into it. And then, the box office was okay, but it wasn't the huge hit that I don't know if they thought this was going to be. I mean, who would actually think that this was going to be a major hit? Did they think that they're going to capture Waterboy money with this?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, again, they have an actor who at least some people resonate with, playing a character who's a nice guy in a bad world. So that is a lot of Sandler's kind of characters, right? Like the lovable idiot. And Chris Kattan is playing that. I don't know why Sandler works so much better than Chris Kattan. I think they're both just as endearing. I mean, Adam Sandler at his best really is endearing as a character actor in terms of comedies. Like, at his best, he can really, like with Wedding Singer, which I think is one of his best movies. Like, that's a fully realized character that you genuinely feel for. And that's because Adam Sandler is so good at what he does. And I think Chris Kattan is in that same camp. It's just the writing for this movie wasn't as good. I don't think this is Chris Kattan's fault at all. I mean, it had plenty of people behind it who knew what they were doing, Robert Simons included. And Chris Kattan's funny. That's not in question. It's just whether or not this movie serves his comedy stylings the best, and it really doesn't. One of the other writers for this film, David Garrett, he worked on Deuce Bigelow, European Gigolo. So, the lesser of the Deuce Bigalow films.
I was really surprised looking at the director of this, who has done a lot of commercial work, but this is his only feature.
I mean, for whatever reason, this movie feels like it's toxic I don't get it. Like, I don't know what the deal is with this movie. It doesn't deserve seemingly all of the hate that it's gotten. Like, Is it because Chris Kattan is easy to hate? Like, is that what it is? Like, I don't understand why people would dislike Chris Kattan, but it feels like it's almost solely directed at him on top of everything else. Like you mentioned the Ebert review, like, first off, fuck Roger Ebert. He's a guy who made a living off of enjoying tearing into movies. But why would you tear into this movie and hate Chris Kattan? Like, a lot of this is not his fault. And like, as someone who does exactly what Roger Ebert does, which is talk about movies, you have to know that this is not entirely Chris Kattan, if Chris Kattan's fault at all. I feel like he's executing exactly the way he's being asked to execute. I don't think the movie is doing him any favors by being recut clearly in post-production, by them taking some of the blue comedy out and making it PG-13. Like, do I think it would have been funny if they could have said fuck and shit? It might have helped, but I don't think it was going to change someone like Roger Ebert's mind, because I think his mind was made up before he went into the movie.
It's easy to do with some of those movies. Like, I haven't seen Bucky Larson yet, but I just have a feeling it's really bad. I haven't seen Superstar yet, but I have a feeling it's really bad. But I would give it the time that it deserves. If I'm a movie critic, I will take the time to watch it. So I might not enjoy it, but I'd give it a shot.
Right. And that's the sad thing about something like Corky Romano is it the best comedy ever made? No. Is it a funny movie? Yes, it is a funny movie, but it's not funny throughout. It's funny in spurts. And again, I always feel bad whenever we talk about comedies, but I feel like we've been doing it a lot more recently than I ever have before. This is purely subjective in terms of how much you're going to get out of it. And comedy, I think, is the hardest genre to write. I know that there are plenty of people that look down on comedy, but making someone laugh is not easy. And on top of everything else, you're often making someone laugh with your own comedy that they find funny, unless you're the kind of person who can walk into a room and read the room and imminently understand where everybody's comedic stylings and tastes lie and play to everybody. But nobody is that good. I mean, there are a couple comedians that are that good, that are that transcendent in their comedic abilities. But like we've already alluded to, every comedic actor or stand-up comedian has kind of piece of the pie. You know, if you don't like prop comedy movies, you're really going to hate anything that Carrot Top does, be it on stage or on film. If you hate physical comedy, you're not going to like anything that Chris Kattan does. You're probably not going to like, again, we've kind of alluded to some other comedians who they're not doing physical comedy, but they're doing more dialogue heavy comedy. If you're not into that, you're not going to like what David Spade brings to most of the roles. So it's kind of hard to suggest anything or bemoan comedies, because this is probably somebody's favorite comedy. It has to be. There's a more than 0% chance that that's the case. And they would probably tell you why that's the case, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there are other movies that they like that lean on a physical comedy actor at the lead. And again, if you're into that, this is going to be a movie for you. If you're not, you're probably not going to resonate with it as much as you and I do.
I definitely could see this as being somebody's favorite movie. I mean, it's not my favorite movie, but I definitely enjoy it. I mean, I've been looking forward to this episode because I remember really liking this movie. And when I rewatched it again, it didn't disappoint. My wife damned it with some faint praise. She's just like, it really wasn't that bad. I was like, yeah, no, it's not. It's not that bad. In fact, I laugh quite a bit while I'm watching this. There are some genuinely funny moments for me. And I know, like, Kattan was kind of upset about, like, the fart humor. He was really like, oh, why do we have to do this? But I think that was a great thing for him to get back at his brothers. This whole thing of, you know, them farting in his general direction, to quote Monty Python, and then him trying to fart at them. And again, I don't think that they called him a dork. I think there was probably something a little bit worse, because why would he be so upset about being called a dork by Chris Penn? Just another victim of ADR, I believe.
Yeah, the ADR in this movie, if anything, it is the biggest sabotage of the movie. It's just the amount of ADR. And you can tell when they're doing it too, because man, it's, hey, they cut the last bit of that joke off, or they cut to a, second unit and don't show the actor's mouth or zoom so they're out of frame, like anything, just to cover up the fact that, yeah, again, you undercut the movie. Like, I don't know why this movie couldn't have been R. If it's going to fail, at least fail with an R rating. Don't fail PG-13. Like, that kind of makes it worse as a movie, that it fails, and it fails because they didn't pull the trigger on it being an R-rated movie, and it's so painfully obvious that they've made those changes. And it does kind of undercut any of the kind of gruff mafia side of the movie. Completely makes it, like, just, I don't know. Look, if you're trying to take advantage of the Sopranos of it all, these guys would be murdered by Tony in a heartbeat, and he wouldn't think anything of it, because these guys are soft the way they're being portrayed in the movie. And look, obviously the joke that one of them can't read and the other one is gay is, again, trading on the idea of a mobster walks into a therapist's office. It's trading on that, like, they're people too thing. But go the full distance. You know that, I mean, Mickey Blue Eyes has the same problem. Like, it's a movie that desperately needed to be R. Not because it would have made the movie 10% better, but it would have allowed the 90% of the movie that's there to actually work well. So I feel the same way about this movie. Like, if it had had that R rating, the mafia parts of the movie would have probably worked better than they do, because the FBI stuff is the least problematic. I think anytime he goes back to his house, all of that, and anytime Chris Penn and Peter Berg show up with him, it all feels very, like, weaker than weak Three Stooges physical comedy, which is a shame, because I think, to your point, most of this movie works, and I don't think this movie's really, quote, bad. I think there are, to your point, way worse. Like, Screwed is way worse than this movie in terms of another early 2000s comedy that doesn't work. Screwed, I think, is a much better example of unsuccessful comedies early 2000.
No, I've seen so many bad comedies from SNL people over the years that this one, to me, ranks one of the better ones. And I mean, there's no Joe Dirt, but it still has a lot of appeal. It was kind of funny. One thing he was saying in that book too is that they had a few scripts that he could choose from, and one that he turned down was Bubble Boy. And I think that he would have been, and I love Jake Gyllenhaal, and I love him in that movie, but I think Kattan could have even pulled that off even more than Gyllenhaal could.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, again, in terms of the need for physical comedy.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what that movie calls for, is someone who understands physical comedy. I haven't seen that movie in forever. But hey, can I ask, was anybody actually convinced that that was a woman, a small child coming up to the door dressed like a Girl Scout? Because Chris Kattan is one tall 5 to 7 year old.
Of course, I was thinking of one of your probably favorite lines, Wilderness Girls.
Yes, thank you, because that is also what I thought of. Another movie that I feel like criminally piled on, but is way funnier than it has any right to be. I think similarly to this movie, like, you guys want to buy some cookies is a funny line, and the way Chris Kattan delivers it is funny, but the idea that he can go up to the front door in disguise and get away with it is ridiculous, because it's still just Chris Kattan, guys.
Yeah, even though he does present a pretty good argument that the postman wasn't him.
Right, it wasn't me. I also like that Vanessa Shaw has like the sexiest nurse disguise on of sexy nurses. Like, there's no way that this woman is actually a nurse. She looks like a sexy nurse.
She went to Party City for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Even with like the white hat. Yeah, it's too funny. I actually think that, Vanessa Shaw, Bridget Wilson, actresses who are opposite these comedic actors, not really undeserving of hate, but a lot of them just, their characters are not there for any reason other than to be romantic interests. And very few of them are written very well, but it's kind of a shame because, again, they're great actors in their own right, but they kind of end up just being plot devices in most of these movies. Like, and they're with our hero by the end of the movie. And it's like, is this really paying off? Like, not everybody can pay off like Ace Ventura. I'm just saying.
It's like them and the straight people have to work twice as hard when they're put into these movies. So hats off big time to Matthew Glave, because I think he does a fantastic job in here playing that straight man and just getting more and more pissed off. And you can play that in different ways, but I think he plays it at the right pitch. To your point, that scene of him in the office, and I love how they're all wearing their colorful ties at that point. And, Corky's won them over, won the boss over, won the two other FBI guys over. And he's just Glave's the outsider who's coming in and just like, why don't you treat me nice? And he's basically the Peter Berg character, where it's just like, you were teaching that nurse how to read. Why didn't you teach me how to read? It's this whole like, we're missing out of daddy's love kind of thing.
I love Matthew Glave in this movie. Again, Christopher McDonald-esque. And like you said, I mean, anyone who is playing the straight role in these movies, that's the thankless job. It really is. Like, the female leads and the straight characters are really thankless. Because again, this isn't a straight character leads the movie like a Naked Gun. Like, Corky is the jokey jokester character of the movie. So yeah, and again, like, it verges on unbelievable in this movie because again of what the movie's kind of plot machinations are. But yeah, I also think it's just very funny again that Chris Kattan doesn't have a lot of movies past this, and I don't think this movie's that bad. I mean, this is like the way he's treated post this movie is like his career is nuclear. It's like radioactive, like don't touch him. And this movie's not that bad. It's not even bad at all. Like it's just wild to me because you look at his filmography and like this movie is just, there's nothing really after this, not in terms of him being the lead.
Right. And he so should have been, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, he ends up working on a bunch of like random things, lending his voice to like C-level animated movies. It's a shame. It's a shame because he is funny.
Don't forget about that live action remake of The Year Without a Santa Claus.
Oh, dear God. Oh, dear God.
I don't think he was Dingle or Jingle, but he was definitely in there.
He was Sparky, which I think was a character. Is that weird that he is talking about that in this movie and then he ends up being in that as well?
Yeah.
I do.
And I want to say one of the other roles that he was in Undercover Brother.
Yes, he plays Mr. Feather, which is funny. But again, that works because he is brought in to be the physical comedy character in the movie, right? Like, and that movie I think works really well because he is the villain in that movie.
Yeah. Well, I think that there are some Eddie Griffin movies that really work well. Like Double Take, I think that's
the one with Orlando Jones?
Yeah. Fucking sucks. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Unless you think to yourself that Eddie Griffin's character is like Tyler Durden and just showing up in Orlando Jones's mind. Much better movie. But The New Guy, I fucking love that movie.
Hell yeah. The New Guy's a great movie. Talk about another weird early 2000s movie that gets dumped on seemingly unfairly. And that's the thing. I think the thing with Corky Romano is he is remembered unfondly the same way Rob Schneider is. And I find that to be unfair. He kind of has gotten lumped in with those kinds of actors. And look, Rob Schneider's political aspirations and leanings aside, Rob Schneider's never been funny. Like, he's been that guy who has a job because of Adam Sandler. And Chris Kattan, I would not say he has a job because of anybody other than himself, which says volumes to who he is. And again, his autobiography kind of going out there and saying, look, this happened to me and this is not great. That's a pretty big thing to come out and say, like, and I know that maybe it's trying to make amends with himself about like why his career went the way that it did. But if he actually had a broken neck, holy shit, like that, come on now, guys, that's not great.
Well, and so he had his father and then also a stepfather. And I'm trying to remember if it was his father that used to just complain about everything all the time. And like his stepfather was like so the opposite. And so he was just like, oh, I can't complain. I can't go to the doctors. I can't do that. He like refused to go to a hospital or anything for the longest time. It was like he had a chiropractor and his chiropractor was like, dude, you're going to get fucking paralyzed if you keep up with this. And, you need to see a doctor. And he finally went in to see one. And they're like, oh, yeah, no, you broke your neck and it's going to take this. And he's like, no, I'm fine. No surgery, no invasive stuff. Don't put any metal in me and all this. And it was just like, dude, you need more help with this stuff. So I think kind of going back to some of the points that you made, I think two things are around this as far as potential failure, and then also Chris Kattan being lambasted. I think Chris Kattan being the face, the literal face of this advertising campaign where it's just who is Corky. Like, you go to IMDb right now, that's the poster, is who is Corky. It's not the one with Peter Falk and him and Berg and Penn. It's just who is Corky, and that big stupid look on his face where he looks like he's happy, but also there's some pain behind the eyes, and it's just like this awkward photo. Looks like, you know, if that happened in your elementary school, you'd probably be the kid who got beat up type of thing. So putting himself out there, which I know was the studio doing that, but making him the focus and making his face the focus of this campaign, that was probably one reason why he takes so much shit from this movie. And the other thing, to your point, as far as this being like such a close to 9/11 movie, I wonder if we weren't ready to make fun of the FBI, because also don't forget 9/11 was such a huge failure in our intelligence. I mean, I don't think they were to the point of allowing mafioso sons to infiltrate them, but this whole lack of communication between the FBI and other branches of the Secret Service and the CIA and just putting all the pieces together and preventing 9/11, they already had a black eye. Corky Romano might have been one blow too many.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is funny. It is funny to laugh at the FBI. I don't know if that's it subconsciously. And then the fact that, you know, there's a big twist at the end of the movie that one of the FBI's own is the serial killer that's kind of been underneath what's been going on in this movie. I guess that could be part of it. I mean, it's subtextual, if anything. I would like to point something out because neither one of us have mentioned it. And if we don't mention it now, we'll probably never get a chance to. This movie has been listed by Robert Pattinson as one of his top 5 favorite movies. Yes, Robert Pattinson of The Batman and other great performances we're not going to talk about, Twilight. He said, and I quote, "That's one of the only films I've pissed my pants at. Like, I actually pissed my pants. The scene where he's on coke was literally the only thing they advertised. It was like the whole point of the movie. I love that character."
He didn't pissant his pants?
I love how Chris Kattan just stripped his whole career in that movie. The only guy off SNL who messed it up, it's like, what happened? Yeah, even he knows that this, like, that's the thing. That's kind of part and parcel with this movie, right? Is kind of, this movie is the downfall of Chris Kattan, I guess. I don't want to say that's what's going on here, but it kind of feels like it. But having Robert Pattinson in your corner for a movie that has fucking 5% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think makes it one of the worst movies of all time. It's at 5%. 7% right now, 7%. It has vacillated between 3 and 7%.
Right now?
It can go up and go down, because when the article was written a couple years ago, it was 5%. So it's actually gone up 2% since 2019.
Oh, let's see if we can get it all the way up to 8%.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I mean, it has a 39% with the audience, which, look, I don't necessarily always agree with the audience, but I think this movie has aged better than anyone would give it credit for, and I think it has been unfairly maligned when it came out, and I think it does work better now, 23 years later. I do think this is a better movie than it was when it came out, and I think you can view it as a movie that is worth your time primarily because it is a Chris Kattan vehicle, and look, there really aren't any others, so this is kind of it.
The nickname Corky is alleged to be taken from real-life New Jersey mobster Gaetano Vestola, whose nickname among the mafia ranks as a street soldier was Corky Gaetano. He's also believed to have been the model for the character in The Sopranos of Hesh Rabkin.
Right.
I had no idea.
There's your Sopranos connection right there, baby.
We can't also not talk about Vincent Pastore, who shows up in here as Cousin Tony. He's taken over the vet office while Corky is doing his undercover work. Fucking fantastic scene.
Their profits are up 25% is what they say, because he's just going and recycling one person's animal into another person's bowl, essentially. So this movie doesn't have as many Soprano connections as something like Mickey Blue Eyes does. But again, you cannot talk about this movie without understanding the world that this movie was coming out in, post 9/11, post Sopranos. And I wonder how different the movie would have been if The Sopranos wasn't a thing, if this movie would have even ever come out, frankly. Because again, unlike Mickey Blue Eyes, which came out essentially before The Sopranos really caught fire, this movie comes out post that. I think, like I said, this is like around the third season of the show even. So you can't ignore the Sopranos of it all. And again, to have this character's name be based on a real person who then Hesh is based on in The Sopranos is a interesting connection outside of the Vincent story of it all.
You know who shows up in here, and I'm so glad he doesn't outstay his welcome, is Blake Clark, who plays a security guard that Corky is embarrassing himself in front of the first time, and eventually gets to know Corky, helps him out and everything. I mean, I've seen him show up in almost every single Adam Sandler thing. I want to say he plays a Cajun in one movie.
That would be Waterboy. That would be Waterboy.
I mean, I do have to say that if we limited Rob Schneider's career to just him being that "you can do it" character, I'd be okay with that. It's
3 movies that he would be in.
He's only done that in 3. It feels like he did that in every Adam Sandler movie.
Waterboy, Little
Parenthood, or Parents.
I think it was Waterboy, Little Nicky, and then maybe Big Dad, or no, Mr. Deeds, or no, is that Steve Buscemi that's in that movie? Steve Buscemi playing like a weirdo, backwoods character. Yeah, Rob Schneider, I think he's only done it in two, maybe 3 movies. But again, to your point,
where Buscemi's eyes are pointing in 2 different directions.
Yes,
oh my God.
Yes.
He is so good. I mean, say what you will about Adam Sandler, and I probably love a few of those Adam Sandler movies, but certain things like Buscemi's cameos, those always just work for me. And I actually really like Mr. Deeds, and I even went back, I watched the original Mr. Deeds. It's like, yes, this is a classic, it's great, but there's certain things from the remake of Mr. Deeds, like John Turturro as the very sneaky butler. Fucking love that.
Who's the female lead opposite Adam Sandler in that movie?
It's Winona Ryder.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So look, Winona Ryder in that movie, if I remember correctly, she's very funny. There's a scene where she's on the phone with Adam Sandler with Alan Covert in the background, and he's pretending to be injured. And she calls him Little Billy Barty, which I never understood why it was funny until much later in life. But look, I have no problem admitting that there are more than a couple Adam Sandler movies that I do not only find funny, but could more or less quote out of hand, like Waterboy. Well, snakes don't exactly have parts, but if I were to say which part this is, I would say it's knee. I mean, shit like that coming out of Kathy Bates' mouth is hilarious. And look, those movies are great, not necessarily.
Abraham Lincoln is the devil.
Right. All of that is because of the character actors in those movies. Sandler knew how to surround himself with great character actors. And I mean, this movie has that same DNA going on throughout. I think that this, Corky Romano is a movie that is inherently flawed, but it was clearly being made by people who knew what they were doing, at least in terms of the production aspect of it, because Robert Simons is more successful than he is less successful because he's been working you don't work for a long time in the industry and consistently make no money. You know what I mean? You know that, I know that. But again, some of this does seem like, okay, well, what do we do with Chris Kattan after Corky Romano bombs? And not giving him another opportunity to do another movie like this is kind of a shame. But at the same time, I get it. And hey, weren't we talking about this movie because Peter Falk is in it?
We were, and yeah.
He's is really the reality of it.
Yeah, all of his scenes are very solid, obviously. But yeah, he's barely in this, unfortunately. He's right there at the beginning, he's right there at the end, but throughout the middle, we just get a couple check-ins and not nearly enough.
You're telling me that one woman fathered all 3 of these very distinct, unique-looking human beings who look nothing like one another? At least in Little Nicky, it is kind of alluded to that they all have different moms. In this movie, that's the same mom that birthed those 3 people who look very different from one another. Chris Penn and Peter Berg couldn't be at further ends of the spectrum from one another at this point in their physical appearance. And then you have Chris Kattan, who's not 6 foot, not even, barely 5'10". And Peter Falk is their dad, which I think for me, I don't get why he's in this movie, because it's not that he doesn't add anything, but again, if you watch this movie and you don't think Peter Falk is making the easiest paycheck he's ever made, I don't know what movie you're watching, because holy shit, he's literally sitting down in a bed the entire movie. And You can tell when the reshoots were because his hair is like unkempt and then kempt, and he looks different when they're cutting away. You can tell. Man, I wish, to your point, that we could see the original scripted version of this movie, because I don't think it would have been as big of a kind of a public failure as this movie seemingly was.
Well, yeah, I'm looking through Kattan's filmography, and I'm not seeing the moment where, oh, if only this had been bigger, it would, because all these movies that he's making afterwards just aren't there, like Heartbreakers, Holiday Heist. He was in Food Fight, which I think is that the one that's like one of the worst?
Yes. It's also spoken in hallowed terms at how bad it is. It's the movie that is essentially just fucking advertisement. Hey, look, Charlie the Tuna is a character in this movie. What?
Right. It's not the one that Seth.
That's Sausage Party.
Thank you.
Which I actually don't hate as much as I think. I don't know. That's another comedy I kind of probably enjoy more than most people, especially because there are not a whole lot of animated food raunchy comedies. Imagine if this movie was rated R, where they could have taken it and where they might have taken it originally. And then, this movie compared to that movie, it's not successful, but on its own, this movie's better than Pat, and it's better than The Ladies' Man. That's for sure. It's better than 50%, if not 75% of the post SNL movies. This one, I think, gets unfairly lumped in with movies that it is much better than.
Definitely. No, and I hope that folks that have listened to us talk about this movie for almost an hour and a half, if they haven't seen it, okay, I don't know why you've listened this long, but I really hope that you go check this movie out, because I think more people need to check it out. I think more people would enjoy this movie if they just gave it a chance.
I agree 100%. Again, if you're looking for something that's not necessarily trying as hard as one might think to make you laugh, but is doing something different, and you have a soft spot for Chris Kattan, this is right up your alley. And again, you can do worse than this movie in terms of SNL cast member movies. Chris Kattan is at least trying, which some of those movies can't be said for the leads in those movies.
Well, Chris, we will be back next month with a regular episode of The Shabby Detective, where we will be kicking off the 4th season of the show. So I'm looking forward to getting back to our favorite TV detective from the 1970s, with possible exception of Barney Miller. But at least we get to see, Barney diffuses the crimes, whereas Columbo actually solves the crimes, I suppose. So until we come back then, what are you working on these days?
Everything that I'm working on is more or less audio related and can be found over at weirdingwaymedia.com. In terms of video related stuff, you can find me hosting weekly film foundations with Someone's Favorite Productions, Ryan Verrill. But as for video and audio, Weirding Way Media is going to be where you can find 99% of it, other than one thing, but I'll let you mention that, Mike, because I'm going to ask you the same thing. Where can you find most of the stuff that you work on?
Well, wouldn't you know, over at weirdingwaymedia.com. Yeah, where you can find all the things that I do and that Chris works on as well, pretty much, except for one thing, which is the exclusive that both of us have for our $10 and up patrons over at Patreon. So I guess they are Patreons. They're not patrons. We can't.
There are patrons on Patreon.
So they get it on Patreon with Ranking on Bond, where every month we talk about a different James Bond film or two, or a TV show, anything James Bond related. But we're starting at the beginning, working our way through. And when we come back with that, we will be talking about Diamonds Are Forever. So you can go over and listen to quite a few Ranking on Bonds. Just join up with our Patreon. I know mine's over at patreon.com/projection booth. I believe yours is over at patreon.com/culturecast.
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
I was nodding and saying yes. Sorry, I didn't realize you couldn't see
It's
me.
an audio medium, Chris.
Sorry. But I didn't realize you wanted me to respond in the audio affirmative.
Well, until we come back talking about Columbo, I want to thank John Walker for our opening theme and Colin Gallagher for our closing theme. And I want to thank you for listening to this episode. Again, hope you enjoy some Corky Romano. Let that brighten your life a little bit.
And hey, we talked as long as the movie, runs for. So there you go.
Yeah, we could be doing a commentary track right now.
Just imagine the Corky Romano re-release on Shout Factory with an all-new commentary. Yeah.
I'm holding out for Criterion.
Oh, Robert Pattinson approved, baby.